Hello friends. So we're going to talk about something that can be quite confusing in JavaScript. It's kind of notoriously a bit confusing, and that's closures in JavaScript. So basically, let's say that we have a var, let's just say that we have a function called greet. It's like a greet function. And you pass in greeting, then you invoke it. Now, instead of returning like console.log, whatever greeting they put plus, Mark or whoever, maybe pass in a name here. Instead of doing that, let's do something a little bit different. Let's return another function, and this function is going to take a name, right? And then let's console.log greeting plus space plus name. Now, why would you do this? Why wouldn't you just put a name right here? Well, let me show you. So, first of all, here's how we would call this. What we would do, we would just say greet. We would invoke it, and we would give it a greeting. Let's just say hello is the greeting. Then, since we have another function that's being returned right here, once we call this greet function, we can call the function being returned, because what it returns is a function. So we can call it just like this, and we can put a name, Garrett. So when we run this, I don't know why this is running slowly. We inspect it, go into our console, and we should get hello Garrett. Okay, well that's fine. So we have hello Garrett right here. Now, let's say that we wanted our greeting to change depending on who we were talking to. Let's say that let's take off this Garrett right here, and let's say that we just put a variable, say what's up equals greet.hello. So when we do that, we could just call say what's up and pass it the name Garrett, right? And when we do that, it does the same thing. Let me put an exclamation point here so we know that we're doing it differently. It's still giving us the same thing. So right here, this say what's up variable, it's basically holding this invoked function, which gives you back another function that requires a name when you invoke it. So you can just invoke that like that. Well, why would you do that? Well, let's do it like this. Let's say that and this is just an example, let's say that you wanted to have different languages, right? So let's just say English greeting equals hello, var Spanish greeting equals greet, and let's say hola, and then var default greeting, actually let's call it Flanders greeting. It says something weird like greet Idaho. Okay, so you have three different greet functions that are being called. So the only thing that you have to do is if you want to invoke the English greeting, you would just pass in a name. A nice English name would be Harry, and then Spanish greeting. I have three E's here. A nice Spanish name would be Eduardo, and Flanders greeting. and that would be Ned. Actually, Ned would be saying it, so it would be Homer. Actually, it would be neighbor. Oh, let's just put Homer. Okay, so it ran all of the code and gave us different outputs for each one. What a closure is basically this. Whenever you return a function, it's still needing this greeting variable. It's sitting lexically within this greet function. So even though this greet function has been executed and has been popped off the execution stack, its execution context has been popped off the execution stack, the memory space for this variable greeting is still there. So when you call this function and it's returned, this function is returned and it gets invoked, it creates its own execution context, but its outer environment lexically that it looks for the variable greeting, even though it's not in this, even though this greeting variable isn't in the execution context of this return function, the greeting, the variable environment for the greeting in the function greet execution context is still there. Even though the execution context is gone, the memory space for the variable is still there. That variable space that is set up in memory is still there. So you can still gain access to this greeting variable, and that is what a closure is. A little bit complicated, and it can get a lot more complicated. I'm going to make another video a little bit more complicated, but this is the most bare bones examples of what closures are in JavaScript. So you have to understand scope, execution context, variable scope, the scope chain, the outer environment, the memory space setup for variables, the variable environment within execution context. You have to understand all of that to understand closures. But this is a good starting point. So I hope it helped.